Kansas State University studios, this is the Kansas Ag Report with Britton Rucker.
Nearly 7 in 10 new data centers are being planned in rural America, and Kansas is among the states working to attract that investment. Coming up, what the growing data center industry could mean for Kansas agriculture. Plus, who takes over the farm when you're ready to step away. Coming up, how Ag Transitions is helping Kansas families plan for the future and connecting landowners with the next generation of producers. And from the latest moves in the ag markets to the headlines impacting producers across Kansas, we're keeping you up to date. The news you need to know coming up. And finally, a big crop insurance check can help cover a tough year, but it could also come with a big tax bill. Coming up on the Ag Advisors, when that payment becomes taxable and when you may be able to push some of that income into another year and the planning moves producers need to make before.
The Kansas Ag Report is proudly brought to you by Kansas State University, the Kansas Soybean Commission, Kansas Farm Bureau, and the Kansas Wheat Commission.
A welcome into the Kansas Ag Report. I'm Britt Rucker. The USDA numbers Kansas farmers rely on to make major decisions are facing new questions. The National Agricultural Statistics Service has lost nearly 40% of its staff since 2024, while fewer producers are responding to USDA surveys. That matters because NASS reports help shape everything from crop estimates to markets. Now USDA reviewing how those reports are produced and looking at more satellite data, modeling, and other technology. And with the USDA jobs shifting out of Washington, Kansas City is one of 5 regional hubs expected to receive positions. A major beef plant is coming back online, and that could matter for Kansas cattle prices. Workers at Cargill's Fort Morgan, Colorado plant approved a new 5-year contract after months of stalled production. Harvest expected to restart in September. The plant can process more than 4,000 cattle a day, adding another major buyer to a market already short on cattle. That means more competition for feed cattle and fed cattle across the region, including Kansas, while putting even more pressure on already negative beef packer margins. A massive railroad merger is moving forward, and farm groups are raising concerns. Federal regulators have restarted their review of the Union Pacific's proposed purchase of Norfolk Southern, which could create the nation's first coast-to-coast railroad. A concern for agriculture, about 95% of U.S. grain elevators are already served by just one railroad. And more data centers are being planned in rural America, including new opportunities here in Kansas. Nearly 7 in 10 data centers are now in development nationwide and planned for rural areas. Kansas is among the states offering tax incentives to attract those projects, which can bring major investment and new infrastructure to rural communities. At the same time, agriculture groups are watching how increased demand for land, electricity, and water could affect producers. Coming up on the Kansas Ag Report, what happens to the farm when it's time for the next generation to take over? And coming up, how Ag Transitions is helping Kansas producers plan ahead and helping connect landowners with the future of agriculture. And from the latest moves in the ag markets to the headlines impacting producers across Kansas, we're keeping you up to date. The news you need to know coming up. And what would you do with a $300,000 crop insurance check? Before you spend it, there are some major tax questions you need to answer. On the Ag Advisors, Paul Neiffer and Roger McEowen break down what farmers should know about crop insurance taxes and why the check shouldn't dictate your tax strategy. That's all coming up on the Kansas Ag Report.
Next time you see a beautiful field of corn, reach out and thank the farmers who work tirelessly to raise corn for livestock feed, renewable fuels, and exports to feed a growing world population. The farmers on the Kansas Corn Commission work for Kansas Corn with grower-funded checkoff dollars that support foreign and domestic market development, research, promotion, and education to expand opportunities for Kansas farmers. To learn more, visit kscorn.com.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
Welcome back to the Kansas Ag Report. Passing the farm or ranch on to the next generation can be one of the biggest decisions a family makes, and figuring out where to start isn't always easy. K-State's Ag Transitions program is designed to help Kansas farm and ranch families navigate that process. Joining us now is Ashlee Westerhold with K-State to talk about the resources available here. Now, Ashlee, when we talk about transitioning a farm or ranch to the next generation, it can feel overwhelming. What's usually the recommendation that you say families must take?
I think the first big kind of conversation that needs to happen is in that marital couple. So if you are a husband and wife, really talking to each other about what the goals are of what is our legacy, what are we hoping to see of the next generation, and kind of doing that internal soul searching within your own individuals. Next step would be calling a professional to say what resources are out there to get us start thinking about questions that will come up in this process. And here at K-State, we are that resource, and we're able to start those conversations.
Absolutely, and that's exactly where Ag Transitions comes into play. For folks that's never even heard of that, what service is that?
Yeah, so Ag Transitions, or the Office of Farm and Ranch Transition, has been around for over 4 years now. We really provide the opportunity for people to connect with us when they're starting this process. So how to start these conversations and where to go next. We are also a service where we are able to provide a land link. And so we are linking people who are interested in farming with those who do not have a successor. So some people out there might say, I want my farm to continue for a next generation, but I don't have that in my family. So can I find that in a individual? And usually it's a young beginning farmer or rancher. And so we have that opportunity here at K-State to house the Kansas Land Link program. And then lastly, really the third tier of our office is we provide beginning farmer or rancher education. And that's on campus with our Returning to the Farm course. And that's actually across the state with a lot of online programs and some community college partnerships.
If folks are interested in any of those services you guys offer, how do they get a hold of you?
The best way to reach us is agtransitions.org. It is a website. You can actually fill out a consultation form directly from that website to schedule an initial call. Additionally, you could call my office directly, 785-532-4526, and you will receive me.
A real person.
Yes, so I am traveling a lot when I go and see farm families across the state, but I do make a very conscious effort to either call people back on Mondays or Fridays and reserve those days as my in-office days. And so if you call us, just expect me to call you back on a Friday or a Monday.
Yeah, we know succession planning isn't always easy, not the easiest conversations to have. So having somebody like you is incredible. So
I'm just here as a person who wants to listen, wants to provide you next steps, and really keep you accountable through the process. And I say I'm an accountability coach, and I didn't know that would be where my job would lead me. But it is a very important job when we're talking about one of the biggest decisions of your lives when it comes to legacy planning.
Ashlee Westerhold with K-State, thanks so much for joining us. Still ahead on the Kansas Ag Report, we are checking in on the markets and what producers need to be watching for as we move closer and closer to harvest. Stay with us.
Many seed companies claim to offer the latest genetics, but how many have tested those genetics in soils just like yours? The Oldie Seed Know to Grow research program has fully tested the latest seed genetics in soils that are right in your neighborhood. The Oldie Seed Know-to-Grow program can recommend the best performing hybrids from technologies like Enlist, Extend, and LibertyLink that will optimize the yield and profit of every acre on your farm. Contact Oldie Seed today.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.
Grain markets are finding some strength as global conflicts continue to influence trade, but uncertainty remains over just how big this year's U.S. crop will be. Meanwhile, cattle futures continue to face an uphill battle. And joining us now to break it all down is market analyst Darrell Holladay. Darrell, let's start with grain here. We've seen some strength in the market recently as global conflicts continue. What's driving that strength, and how much are these global developments influencing prices right now?
I think on the wheat side, that is the number one issue, the Russian situation, Ukraine situation. That's probably the largest one. The U.S.-Iran situation has become somewhat of a stalemate. It's affecting energy prices, which affects corn and soybean oil to some extent. But the big driver, the grain that's being affected the most is really wheat, and the fact that Russia and Ukraine have a hard time doing that. We are not picking up any sales there as a result of that yet. But if this continues, we will probably get some.
Now, here at home, there are still some questions surrounding U.S. yields. How much uncertainty remains over the size of this crop, and what could this mean for grain prices as we move closer to harvest then?
Well, we've seen a lot of support this week because of crop scouts out, and many of them thought the crop was disappointing in a lot of areas of support. But this is pretty traditional for this tour to be well below what the actual crop is. So I would say the range and ideas on the corn and soybean yields there's always pretty wide debate, but this debate might have a wider range. And when that happens, you tend to see the market go up. So I think that's really what happened today. We'll get past these numbers and then we'll move on. As I like to tell people, there's a tool we use to figure out what the actual yield is, and it's called a combine, and that'll come later. So
Absolutely. Darrell, turning now to cattle. Lots of folks paying attention to this. Futures seem to be fighting an uphill battle right now. What's creating that pressure, and what are you seeing between the futures cash market and the cash cattle market?
You know, three things have really stood out. The first is the packers have closed plants to try to get the back in line, or to get in line with the supplies, and that's been a gain leverage there against the fed cattle. Secondly, we backed up a lot of cattle in the north, a lot of big cattle that needed to go 3 and 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, and that is really hung over the market this week. It pressured it, but we'll work through those. And then we got the big news on Friday that President Trump announced that he was going to open the door for 300,000 metric tons of ground beef to come in at zero tariff on the secondary tariff. Bottom line is that was seen as very negative, but the details of that would tell you that is not likely to happen, because there's only 3 countries that are in that secondary tariff, and that's Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. The others are not. So I don't think it's anything possible. I think it's more of a tweet than actuality, but we were under pressure and came back. So I think, but it's kind of that uphill battle. It seems like everybody wants to announce something that hurts the cattle market, and we've continued to be a little bit weaker.
Yeah, market analyst Darrell Holladay, thanks so much for joining us. Coming up next, insurance payments can provide some much needed relief when disaster strikes, but when does that money become taxable? Stay with us.
If seed companies and the soybean checkoff built a better variety, that future is here. The time is now. To meet end user demands, the soybean checkoff is investing in the compositional quality of soybeans, including meal. A message from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers.
Premier Farm and Home has what you need to make your lawn the best in the neighborhood.
Hi, I'm Ken. We choose Premier Farm and Home for the professional look that we do ourselves.
Feel free to stop in. You can also visit our website at heycow.com.
Kansas Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture, represents grassroots agriculture. The state's largest and most powerful farm organization stands up for its members through leadership development, agriculture education, legal defense, environmental advocacy, farm safety, and risk management. Members also enjoy money-saving benefits. To join our organization today or to learn more, go to www.kfb.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Welcome back into the Kansas Ag Report. Crop insurance is designed to help farmers manage risk when weather or other circumstances causes a crop loss. But when that insurance check arrives, there can be another question. What does that check mean for your taxes? Today, we are talking about crop insurance and tax planning with agricultural tax specialist Paul Neiffer and agricultural law and tax professor Roger McEowen. Paul, let's start with just the basics here. When a farmer gets a crop insurance payment, is it taxable income?
The answer is yes, it is taxable income, but the more critical answer is when do we have to report that income? Does it have to be reported in the current year, or are we allowed to defer it into a future year? So yes, it is taxable, but again, as I said, more importantly, when is it taxable?
So Roger, this is kind of where the planning gets a little interesting here. Can a farmer actually postpone recognizing some of that income?
Well, the answer is, and I hate to do this, but this is a pretty common answer in the tax world is, and Paul knows where I'm going with this, is it depends. It depends on what the crop insurance payment ties to. Is it a revenue payment? Is it based on crop loss? Because the code is actually pretty specific. You have to have damage to crops, and that payment has to be on account of physical damage to those crops. So really the answer is it depends.
Of course, right? Paul, give us an example of what that might look like for a Kansas farmer.
Yeah, so again, assuming the Kansas farmer is a cash method farmer and they typically sell more than 50% of their crop after the year of damage, if they collect a payment related to the year of damage and it's all related to damage, then they have two options. They can either elect to just simply pick it up as income in the current year, or their tax advisor, when they're preparing the tax return, can elect to defer that crop insurance payment into the following year. So in 2026, they collect $100,000. It's all related to damage, nothing related to price. They can either pick up the $100,000 this year, or they can push the $100,000 to 2027.
Yeah, but the big thing here is you're still paying the tax. You're not making it disappear. You're just moving it from one year to another. Now, Roger, a lot of farmers today have revenue protection rather than just traditional yield insurance. Does that change the analysis?
Well, that's where, as I was indicating earlier, that's where farmers need to be really careful on this. If you've got a revenue insurance policy, then that can reflect more than one thing. They can reflect actual yield loss that's caused by physical damage to the crop, which would be deferrable because that syncs up with what the code requires. But it could also reflect the decline in commodity prices. So you have to pick it apart. So for purposes of the crop insurance deferral rule, the IRS said that for revenue policies, just the portion that is tied to physical damage to the crop would be deferrable. The portion that is tied to price decline is not deferrable. So got to be careful on that. Hopefully the crop insurance agents can provide the data for them. And I think many of them do. To split that out for you appropriately, because the IRS is looking to tie it to physical damage to the crop.
Now, Paul, we live here in Kansas where we can get about anything when it comes to weather. What about federal disaster payments? Do farmers have to treat those any differently?
You know, the code allows you to elect to treat it as if it was crop insurance, but we have to be very careful because most of the programs out there currently we're under SDRP, Supplemental Disaster Relief Program, but that's for 23 and 24. Now, the problem is that disaster occurred in 23, the disaster occurred in 24. We're actually collecting the payment in either 25 or 26. Therefore, we've collected that payment after the year of disaster. So if we're basing it on the normal crop insurance rules, remember, you can only defer that payment to 1 year after disaster. Well, in the case of SDRP, we've already deferred it at least 1 year, if not 2 or 3 years. So we already effectively have gotten that deferral. So there are certain disaster payments, like over on the livestock side on forage or some of those other ones that possibly those actually happened in the year of, and again, it has to be related to crop insurance, what you would normally collect on the regular crop. If it's related to crop insurance, then those might be deferrable. But for most of the Kansas row crop farmers, likely that disaster aid is going to be in the year after disaster or even further. Also, certain other crop insurance programs such as whole farm or ECO or SCO, those always are collected in the year after damage, so you can't defer those. So just because you get a 1099 showing crop insurance proceeds, your homework has just started. So you have to determine what that was really for.
And Roger, Paul talked about this a little bit, about those deferred insurance proceeds. Anything to add on that? Is that something you simply want to tell your accountant about?
Yeah, I would say don't just simply tell your accountant, document it. Make sure you get good documentation because it is complex, as Paul was mentioning. I think our listeners and viewers can understand how complex this can be. But the election requires a statement to be attached to the tax return, and that's a key point of this. So you have to identify the crops that were damaged. You have to identify the insurance policy that is tied to that crop. You have to identify the date of the damage. So you need to book all of these things down. You need to write them down. And what were your insurance payments that were received and the insurance companies that were involved? You have to document that. And the basis for determining that the farmer normally would have reported more than 50% of the crop income in a subsequent year. You have to document all of that because you have to have, as we've indicated, cash basis and a normal practice of deferring your crop income into the following year. And I think there's one more important point, Brooklyn, that is that the IRS says that the election covers all crops that represent a single trade or business. And that's a key point to understand. So this is something that the farmer and their tax advisor need to think through carefully before that tax return gets filed.
We know a lot of this can kind of get in the weeds, a little confusing. Paul, let's do a real world example here. Let's say the farmer receives a $300,000 insurance check. The farmer has the cash, but what should they be thinking besides the insurance itself?
Well, again, when you collect a $300,000 insurance check, and Roger and I have covered that a little bit, you have to determine, was this all related to damage? Was part of it related because the harvest price ended up being less than the discovery price? So you have to break down that component. Again, we think a lot of insurance companies actually break that down for you, so you don't necessarily have to go through a calculation, but it's going to give you that breakdown. Then also, if it's a $300,000 check that you receive for ECO and SEO, we already know that it's taxable in the year that you receive it, so you don't have to do any extra work there. But if it's really related, hey, I had damage, I had hail come through, or I had a drought, and the assessor came out and they've determined it's $300,000 and I get that check, then again, you still have to break down how much was price, how much was related to damage.
So are you guys saying the farmer shouldn't let the insurance check dictate the tax strategy here?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Britton. I like to tell farmers, you don't let the tax tail wag the farm dog, or in this instance, your tax planning dog. So if you've got a farmer that needs a piece of equipment, that's one thing. That's totally different. But buying a piece of equipment solely to avoid paying tax is a very expensive way, and I think Paul would agree with this. That's an expensive way of saving $1 of tax. And so you don't want to look at it that way. The better approach here is to look at the farm's economic needs as a whole. Look at that first, and then use the tax law to structure those decisions as effectively as you possibly can. And with all the tax law changes, and Congress does change the rules on us pretty frequently, and they've done so numerous times over the last several years, there may be significant depreciation. There may be other planning opportunities that are out there, but you've got to fit a farmer's got to fit their actual business plan around or their tax strategy inside their farm business plan overall.
So let's make this really practical here. If I'm a Kansas farmer and I've received a large crop insurance payment this year, what are the first 5 questions that I should start asking my tax advisor with?
Oh, you're going to try to pin me down to 5 questions here, so I'm going to try. So again, when that check comes in, number 1 is, what was this check for? What type of insurance was it for? Then number two, what was the date? Again, if it's ECO or SCO and it's received in the year after, that date's critical because it's a year after damage. And then number three, do I qualify as a qualifying farmer? I'm on the cash method of accounting, and I normally sell more than 50% of my crop in the year after harvest because some farmers sell all their crop in the year of harvest. Now, I've also met with farmers that they don't sell their crop for 10 years, it seems like. So that's a different situation. And then I think another question that needs to be asked is, do you keep your books and records on one farm situation? Some farmers keep multiple books and records, so they may be able to allocate one crop insurance may be deferrable and the other one may not be deferrable. And then also, I think I want to make sure that I'm looking at my previous year. I want to find out, did I defer crop insurance proceeds into the current year? If I did that, that may change my answer as to whether I really want to bring crop insurance into the current year or deferred for another year. So I think that's about 5 questions. I'm not tying it down to exactly 5. So
Yeah, and I'll just reemphasize, Britton, one thing Paul said there, and that is, what's my normal marketing history show? What am I go to your actual records and look what your records on your crop history in terms of reporting your crop proceeds show. That ties back into whether you're qualified to do this to begin with, and that's a key point.
Now, Roger, if you had to identify one mistake farmers make with crop insurance and taxes, what would that be?
I'd say waiting too long. You get the insurance check and then you think about taxes in March or April. Don't do that. And I'm assuming Paul would concur with that because we see that all the time. Don't wait. By then, many of your tax planning opportunities are gone. So the conversation should happen before you get to year end, particularly if you've got a large insurance payment that you've received, because your tax practitioner can help you go through that and sort out what is deferrable and what's not, and look at your history and answer all those questions we just talked about. Don't wait till you're right on top of the filing deadline.
But Paul, give us your one big takeaway from this issue.
I think one big takeaway that I typically see farmers sometimes miss, and it's really related to the fact, hey, I deferred crop insurance last year, and I forget this year I actually deferred it. So they come to year end and they're getting ready to do the tax return. They go, uh-oh, here's $400,000 of income I didn't know about. So I've seen that bite some farmers. And so you just really got to be careful. This is something where you got to look at the previous year and the current year.
And Roger?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that. You want to look at crop insurance as part of your whole farm business plan. The goal is not just simply to postpone tax. The goal is to integrate it with timing of your income, timing of your expenses, your types of purchases during the year, and your other farm decisions, so that the tax result is basically the part of the economic reality of the entire operation.
So the message for farmers, pretty simple here. When crop insurance check arrives, don't just deposit it. Start planning. Understand what the payment represents. Know when it will be taxable and determine whether you qualify to defer eligible proceeds. And also talk with your tax advisor before the end of year. Paul and Roger, thank you so much. I'm Britton Rucker, and this is the Kansas Ag Report.